Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. The session today is called Getting Serious, not unserious, serious about the green economy, social and economic tools to achieve bold climate targets. And I'm thrilled to be joined by two fantastic leaders, Teresa Ribera, who hosted COP25. She is the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for the Ecological Transition and the Demographic Challenge of Spain, very long title. And Nicola Sturgeon, who needs no introduction, the First Minister of Scotland, the location, beautiful location that of course is hosting COP26. We were supposed to be joined by Yasmin Fouad, who's the Minister of the Environment of the Arab Republic of Egypt, which of course will be hosting COP27. Unfortunately, she's very busy in negotiations. If she's able to, she will join us for part of the session. But of course, we will be in dialogue with her, we all will be, for over the next year because we have huge expectations on COP27. Now, how we're going to organize this session is very much reflecting on two big issues. One is the point that's in the title. What does it mean to become serious? Why is it, as the IPCC report has reflected on this summer, we are simply not moving at pace? We had a 16-year-old, who's now 18 years old, Greta Thunberg, say to the world, what do you do when your house is on fire? Do you sit there and debate the pros and cons of getting out? No, you get out quickly. And the planet, of course, is on fire in terms of global warming. Why are we not moving at pace? So I'm going to be reflecting with our wonderful panelists the bottlenecks that they themselves are facing as national leaders, but also, of course, as global leaders speaking to different leaders in the world, but also in terms of their own tools, what needs to actually change. And the second part is what is changing, because of course this isn't just a negative story. There's actually a lot of really interesting experimentation globally, and we will reflect with you on what you are doing. For example, this morning we had a wonderful session at the Lighthouse in the centre of Glasgow with the new leader of the Scottish National Investment Bank, which is in fact very much almost a climate bank. It's a mission-oriented bank putting climate change at the center of the missions in terms of really fostering that intersectoral collaboration between different types of companies and the need to provide patient long-term finance in order to actually reach net zero. And Teresa Ribera, I know, has been experimenting for a long time as actually a global leader around the SDSN network, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, so putting the SDGs at the heart of the budgeting process, but also recently with the new climate law. So again, the bottlenecks, actually, that's sort of a pun on words, which I won't go into, the bottlenecks but the solutions. And if we can't find solutions, then this whole conference will have been a waste. But it is about the urgency, and hence we actually commissioned this piece of art, which you might have seen the neon version in the hall by Cornelia Parker, who is one of the UK's most famous artists. You might know her from The Exploded Shed. But the neon says, "Hurry up, please, it's time," from The Wasteland of Oscar Wilde, but also it's what they say in pubs in the UK when it's time to get out. Hurry up, please, it's time. And this is the mobile version. So this kind of urgency of moving fast, as again the student movement, Fridays for the Future, is asking this generation to finally do its job, but also the need to take care, to structure, to design the solutions in such a way that global warming, climate change is at the center. And that ultimately means no longer doing the usual dichotomy of the economy here and then the good, hearty, feely stuff there, whether it's about health or climate, but bringing those missions and those challenges at the center of how we understand, model, and practice economic growth. So I'm going to start with COP25. Okay, so Teresa, can you, and we will maybe stay on a first name basis if that's okay with everyone, can you reflect with us, if you think back, now it was more than a year ago, so this was pre-COVID, COP25, what you faced also in terms of, in some ways, hosting, of course, COP25, but both the national and the global challenges that, what were the reflections in terms of why we weren't moving at pace? Where are the bottlenecks, but also in terms of your own country, where you think the static kind of inertia is before we move on to the solutions?
Okay, so first comment is that it was true, we were on fire, there was no location to host the COP, and we organize things to host the COP, which was incredible. Taking it from now, I think that it was very interesting, and it was a strong signal. We want to get engaged, and we want to provide room for a common endeavor, which was the main message. I think that the most difficult thing is that you need to change everything. It is systemic. And the systems change is always something that creates unfair and some dystopic reactions from people. Why you are going to challenge GDP or development because of the planetary boundaries? What do the planetary boundaries mean? So this type of discussions are difficult. How you change your current understanding of prosperity for something that it is not clear what it means and how you can build that. So I think that to a certain extent, nobody wants to lose anything so green, but without losses. And it's not that you lose, it's that you invest, and you need to facilitate the investments. And you have to facilitate the inclusiveness and equity and fairness, the distributional impacts of the change.
Yeah.
And this is difficult. I think that.
Are you reflecting then also on the power of the incumbents? Yes, lobbying against this change.
Yes, to a certain extent it is that's the case. So the expectations of having some profits for a very long time, and then these profits are challenged, and you need to change the way you produce your own profits, and companies expect for more time. But I think that it is even more than that. For a long time, the political energy was focused to attract the investments and the economic players. So to say, there is a good story behind this, because you can build prosperity in a different manner and you can earn profit from a different perspective, which is good, and it is true. And we need the economic players being involved in this transformation. But what about the people receiving those messages? This is a business plan, or this is something for people? And I think that we need to pay attention to hope and to people's expectations. This cannot only be a story for business opportunities. It is a story for business opportunities, but it can be a story for people. This is why I think that the messaging and the educational and practical public discussion, it is very important. And this is why we need to count on the human factor and the emotional aspects, so to ensure that the solidarity is there, that the inclusiveness is there, and that the states, the public interest is behind providing those references that can facilitate the mission. So the horizon, the targets is good, but the important thing is to pave the way, to build the milestones to facilitate this transformation. And this is why I think that the role of governments is absolutely key.
I'd love to come back to that later, this concept also of the just transition. I know that's been a big issue in Spain, and also the conversation with the trade unions. But first, Nicola, can you help us understand the bottlenecks? So why is it taking so long?
Why is it taking so long? Well, I think firstly, it's taking so long because certainly up until now, too many of the countries and businesses that hold all the power haven't felt sufficiently like the house is on fire.
Yeah.
The countries that are already engulfed by the flames are the countries that don't hold the power and don't have the ability to force the pace of change. I was speaking to a minister from the Marshall Islands yesterday who quite simply and bluntly put it to me that this is COP26. His country doesn't have many COPs left before it quite literally sinks into the sea. Probably one of the first places in the world that will disappear, and that's not too far down the line. So I think that is the first reason for the lack of urgency. And what that then leads to is a mindset, a very traditional mindset that thinks more about the costs of acting rather than the costs of not acting. And I mean that in a financial sense, but also in a human sense. So it's still easier to do nothing because it costs a lot. It is absolutely complex and systemic, the change that we need to see. So I think that's why we don't have the sense of urgency. I think that is starting to change. Even in a country like Scotland that is not known for its hot weather, we've just had a summer with some of the hottest temperatures we've ever experienced. So we're starting all to see the flames appear, and that will feed a greater sense of urgency, I hope. We're seeing a younger generation that is in the vanguard of that political change. But the gulf here between those who are at the sharp end of this and those who still think we can haggle and negotiate and take a long time to come to any kind of consensus is massive, and that needs to close, and it needs to close really quickly.
Yeah, I mean it's quite striking that even the developed world, whether it was the fires in Australia, the fires in California, and yet there's a lot of, still climate denial.
The United States back in a progressive sense, which we all welcome, but there's real hostility on the part of the United States to adaptation finance, or some opposition to that, and yet you look at the experience of parts of the United States, and so that mindset has got to shift, and I think it is shifting. The big question here is it shifting quickly enough and going far enough.
And your point, of course, about the cost of inaction versus the cost of action is also reflecting on the Stern report, which was one of the first reports that really kind of made that point. And of course, we've just witnessed that with COVID. The cost of not actually investing and resourcing our health systems is much greater once a pandemic arrives, which of course the consequences have been much worse than they had to be. So why don't we move to solutions, since in the end we are women, and women are always more proactive and positive and full of energy, and seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. So I did want to reflect with both of you, and again it's an honor because the institute that I run at University College London, which is called the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, has actually worked with both of your governments about this idea of having challenge-oriented policies, so an industrial strategy that doesn't just kind of hand out money to sectors and have a list of sectors, but actually that becomes really ambitious on the problems that we're having, of which climate change is one of the biggest, and then fostering all that kind of intersectoral, and what you were saying, kind of all of government, aligned government, interdepartmental, but especially intersectoral types of collaborations in order to get there. So perhaps we could reflect with both of you again now, starting with Teresa, on just what your own government has been experimenting with. I think before you told me in the coffee room around the budgeting, but feel free to talk about any of the kind of tools and instruments that you've worked with to put climate at the center of how you think about the economy.
Well, I think that it has become also systemic in our government policies, which is the thing we need to do. So to fix where you want to be, to a certain extent, is this mission-oriented type of policies. But once you share and you get the public support on where you want to be, you need to move everything. You need to think in different terms on the energy policy, on the mobility policy, on the fiscal policy, on the budget policy, but also in the training, reskilling, transformation, incentives at the local places where the changes are taking place at the highest speed, and people, neighbors, want to have opportunities to live and to earn their salaries in a different thing. And this is what we have tried to do. So to be sure that we agree on the general horizon, and then to work with the different departments, but also with people. I think that it is very important to work with people. When you are going to make this big transformation in such a short period of time, people need to be part of this discussion and feel that they are taking their own responsibility, their own future. And I think that the work with the trade unions, and I see some representatives here, is very important. This cannot be, your profession has been fantastic for decades, but it is not useful anymore. We need to build other type of opportunities, and you only can do that if the social support is there. So I think that having educated citizens, educated workers, educated voters in this field is very important. And something which is also very interesting, and we are trying to learn from previous experience, is the creation of citizens' assemblies, which has just been launched in Spain. And what everybody says is that at the beginning, you identify anonymous citizens that have an average understanding of what climate change means. But after working together for a very long time, for not so long, so for a few weeks, for a few months, people understand why the house is on fire, and want to act much more quicker, and ask governments to act much quicker. And the third thing I guess it is very important is to combine the different levels of responsibility. I'm convinced that mayors have a great power to allow people to experience in a very short period of time what the change may mean for healthy cities, for a different type of mobility, for the social benefits of having houses that are being retrofitted and that are much more efficient in terms of energy consumption, and so on and so on. So I think it's always very important to connect to day-to-day life with citizens, and to get that, I think it is the effort of the whole nation, and we need to mobilize the whole nation, and things do not have a permanent rate of speed. It can be accelerated when the different players understand that that this is something to improve our quality of life.
Before I move to Nicola, just a bit more on this issue of the just transition. At least that's how it's talked about globally. And I think what you're saying is something on top of that. So the just transition could be understood as the kind of the elite in the room decide that we're going to transition to the green economy. And then the trade unions have to defend the workers that might get displaced by making sure that transition is just. By talking about citizen assemblies, you're actually talking about bringing different voices, citizen voices, labor unions, the student movement perhaps, to the table, even to design the missions themselves. And that's something, as you say, that cities sometimes can do in an easier way because they're smaller. In Camden, which is part of London, North London, we have a Camden Renewal Commission that's been thinking about this mission-oriented approach literally at the level of social housing, choosing some housing estates and then bringing the resident associations to the table, not just to be told why retrofitting their homes is a good idea, but what does it mean to talk and to debate, to have safe places to disagree, unlike social media, which sometimes is full of, hate speech, about what it means to live together in a more sustainable way. So, maybe
I think
that participatory
yes,
aspect.
but I think that this is very important because sometimes we feel this frustration of being criticizing whatever or demanding whatever, and we are behind the billboard acting for whatever, and things do not happen. And I think that one thing is, and it is very important, to be a critical citizen, to ask for the solutions and so on, and a very different thing is to start thinking how to solve problems.
Yeah.
And then it can be much more creative if there are different voices trying to think how to solve problems, but it is also important in terms of understanding the reality that you need to change. So imposing a change always creates much fear and a weird reaction.
Yeah.
But if the question is, so how you could be solving this problem? At the first moment, people say, hey, this is not my function. Yes, we know that this is not your responsibility, but it is good to learn together how we can solve problems, because if you are supporting whatever solution we may find, it could be the best solution than when we try to impose the concrete solution, even if it is very rational in economic terms or in political terms.
Yeah. Thank you. Nicola, let us...
Well, this is really, really interesting. I mean, I think actually right now, one of the assets that politicians who want to do more to address the climate emergency have is public opinion in general terms, because by and large our populations, particularly the younger sections of the populations, want us to go further and faster, but that's at the headline. In the detail of that, clearly there are lots of challenges and fears for people's jobs and livelihoods. And participation and including people is, in my view, essential. We've done already two things in Scotland that I think are really important and chime very much with what we've just been hearing here. We've had a Climate Citizens Assembly, which reported not very long ago with really bold and far-reaching recommendations, which government is now seeking to take forward. And secondly, we established a Just Transition Commission, which brought together government and private sector, but also trade unions, to start to look in detail, sector by sector, how we start to make that transition. Now in Scotland, one of the biggest challenges is, of course, oil and gas. We have, in a population of 5 million, 4 million adults, 100,000 jobs dependent on oil and gas. We need to accelerate that transition, but that generates a lot of fear about those jobs. So we're looking in detail across sectors, how do we get from here to where we need to be? So it's very much about inclusion and participation, trying to not have it as something imposed upon people, but something that is driven by people. It doesn't take away all of the challenges and difficulties, but it does attempt to build a sense of common purpose and endeavour around it.
Can you say a bit more about the kind of also new forms of partnerships? Because I think Scotland in some ways has been leading on something that I found very exciting, which is this idea of inclusive growth, not just done through redistributive policies, which are also very important to have, progressive and not regressive taxation policies, but also to have a different type of relationship ex ante, so you don't have to pick up the mess ex post. So the business pledge, for example, which you had, which kind of tries to get businesses to, actually pledge to invest in better
we're trying to,
conditions.
Scotland is the home of the Enlightenment, obviously, so we're trying to promote a sense of enlightened self-interest. And to challenge what, in my lifetime, and certainly in my political career until very recently, has always been presented as a tension and a conflict between economic growth on the one hand and social inclusion and equality on the other hand. These two are often described as in competition, when in actual fact they are two sides of the same coin. We have a stronger economy if we have a population that is supported to be productive, and where there is good wages, support for well-being, and we have a happier, healthier population if we've got an economy that is growing in an inclusive way. So what we introduced was a business pledge where we encourage businesses to sign up to good, fair working practices, paying the living wage, gender balance and equality in their boardrooms, and using that as a way of businesses becoming more productive and more profitable. So seeing these two things as being in harmony, not in tension. So does every business sign up to that willingly and enthusiastically? No, some won't sign up at all. Some sign up because they think it's the right thing to do. They probably haven't internalised it and actually started to do these things. But increasingly we see many businesses understand that it is in their interest. So there's some interesting approaches there, but we've still got a long way to go.
Yeah, just coming back to the title of this session, getting serious about the Green Deal. The Green Deal. The green bit, as Greta says, listen to the scientists, the deal requires a new social contract. So what is the kind of new form of public-private partnership, which can also go beyond perhaps pledges that are voluntary, but actually making them mandatory? And what might that look like? It could be, for example, that if we do have new types of public banks or public institutions, the types of subsidies, guarantees, loans, and so on can be conditional on actually being kind of a good business, no? And it's interesting that in COVID-19, with some of the recovery funding, that idea of conditionality and a new kind of social contract has been implemented by some countries. In France, for example, the finance minister made it conditional for Renault and Air France to actually commit to reducing their carbon emissions in the next 5 years in order to access the recovery, euros. And other countries perhaps haven't gone that way. So could we reflect a bit more on that? Because I think that's the tenth.
So just before I hand over, on the business pledge, we started out very much doing that as a voluntary sign up, and that's still what we would prefer to be, but we are now moving much more to introducing stricter conditionality. So if there is government money, grants, loans, whatever, then there is a conditionality around fair work practices built into that. So there's carrot, but there's also, where necessary, some stick in order to make sure we get the impact. Yeah,
and the head of the Scottish National Investment Bank this morning was saying that he preferred the word impact covenant instead of conditionality, because of course the word conditionality also reminds us of the problematic conditionalities that have been set in the past. But can we maybe also just look at some of the really concrete things you've both done? So maybe Teresa, tell us a bit about the outcomes-oriented budgeting or the climate law that you put into place. So what does a budgeting process look like, and if it's different?
Yes, but before the budgeting, I think that this is very interesting and very important. As I said before, I think that if we want to speed up, to hurry up the transformation, the role of the policies is very important. And the role of the policies is public interest, consumers, citizens, and transformation. So I don't know if conditionalities is the word, but I think that there should be clear signals on what we want to do.
Yeah.
And the European Union has been done so when talking about the Next Generation Fund. So a certain percentage to be invested in green transformation. They do not significant harm to orientate the whole investment of that money. I think that these are messages that are relevant and that allow us to think that we need to recover that space, to provide the right signals when designing the policies. And that's what we try to do also when thinking why we invest here, why we are asking for more transparency, because here there are two questions that need to be tackled in a smart manner. First, we need to be sure that we can do this. So the question of confidence, we are in a position to do so, and we trust the others doing what they say they do. I like it very much, Antonio Guterres stating the fact that we need to show that what it is being promised by companies is real. So I think that being transparent on that is very important, because otherwise we are always thinking, is it true? To what extent this is true? And this happens to public and to private corporate. So I think that this is important, being sure that we trust each other. And for that it is participation and it is transparency. And then oriented to a purpose. And this is something that business understands. And oriented to a purpose is not to get much money and much profit in the very short term. The transformation needs to be supported by people. And in the long run, of course, there would be much money and opportunities and profits that can be there. But in the very short term, there should be, in your deal wording, there should be an engagement from corporates to public, to social, to consumers. If we lose consumers and we lose citizens in this transformation, we would not be able to do that. So it's true that we are living through the turbulent decade. We are going to see lots of great opportunities to make much money, but this is not the purpose. Yeah. The purpose is to support the transformation, and for that we need the engagement of the corporates. It's not just, this is a great opportunity, as I said before, it is, I want to be a positive player in this transformation. And to do so, I need to be perceived as someone that supports the public interest of the citizens and the consumers. And I think that this is a mindset that needs still to be changed a little bit.
Yeah, I think you've both heard me before obsess about the need for a new framing, you know, away from just fixing market failures, which is how economists like to speak, towards actually actively shaping and co-creating the markets of the future, and the need to change vocabulary away from leveling the playing field towards actually tilting. But tilting not by choosing particular sectors, but by actually making it more rewarding to do the right thing, which I think both your examples just, you know, kind of illuminated.
And this is why I also think that it is very important to have this report on how the different concepts in the budget do relate to each of the SDGs. I mean, I think we need common education on what this transformation means and where the benefits of this transformation may be. So, as I say, I think that both from the public side and from the corporate side, it is important to show, to engage, and to facilitate this engagement.
And this, of course, is huge right now with the energy price hikes around the world and different countries actually reacting in a very different way. But even just asking who's going to pay for that, as opposed to just assuming that, you know, by de facto will either be consumers or some companies going bust and so on. Could we talk a bit more about that? Not so much about the energy price increases, or if you want to, but just the question of who pays, right? I mean, and, you know, getting citizens involved is also about, as you say, to really kind of set a positive agenda and to see this as an opportunity for kind of technological, social, organizational change, the jobs of the future, the just transition. But what are the ways in the meantime to make sure that the kind of inclusive growth agenda is implemented, to make sure that the costs, you know, it's easy to say, yes, the long run costs are, it's better to act now than not to act now. But in the meantime, what are the concrete ways to make sure that the kind of the just transition is done through your policies? Nicola?
Well, I think, I mean, it can't be whether it's the increase in energy prices or, you know, much more fundamentally in terms of the transition to net zero. It can't be that the costs all fall on individuals, either in terms of lost jobs or the increased costs of decarbonising the heating of homes. There has to be, you know, significant systemic investment into making that transition. Much of it has to come from government, but there has to be increasingly government-private partnerships. One of the things that is changing for the positive, and, you know, obviously there's profit motives driving this, is that there is now much greater capital there and a much greater appetite on the part of investors to get involved in the transition to green technology. So we've got to make sure we are able to harness that and maximise that. In Scotland, we're doing that through a range of different ways. not least the Scottish National Investment Bank that Mariana, I think, can reasonably claim to be the principal author of, which is a mission-oriented development bank with the transition to net zero being its principal mission, seeking to make sure we're doing, as Mariana says, not just trying to fix the market, but structure things in a way that's fixing the problems and addressing the big challenges we've got, and over time levering capital, private capital as well. We've taken a green investment portfolio to market, because often what you hear from investors is they can't find the projects quickly enough to invest in. So we're trying to bring all of that together, very much driven by a mission mindset. And I think we need to do much more of that.
Great, thank you. Before I open it up to the audience, Teresa, did you want to say something about just the inclusive growth agenda, bringing it together with the sustainable growth agenda and concrete things you've been thinking about?
Well, I would like to come back to the very original question you raised on the world and the house on fire, and something that Nicola said, those feeling the fire did not have the power to water down the fire. And I think that this is also very interesting, because we have learned, because of the COVID crisis, because of the cargoes blocking the Suez Channel and so on, that the world is very small and very interdependent. Also in terms of justice, solidarity, and fires. And I think that this inclusiveness does also apply at the international context. Solidarity. So I think that the transboundary effects of what we do are important, and increasingly important, and we will not be succeeding in terms of the climate crisis, on the social needs, if we do not pay attention to this type of interrelations. And this is also part of this discussion. And it is very important that we succeed in how we can pave the way to transform, to facilitate this inclusive approach and this climate justice, not only within our own societies, which is very important and very complicated, but also among the different countries. And there are many questions that do not have proper answers yet.
That is so important. And one of the big issues at this COP and the discussion here around climate finance is the one that is leading to the erosion of trust, or at least getting in the way of the building of trust. The headline $100 billion a year finance commitment made 12 years ago, not delivered, and yet the developed rich countries could probably, much easier than they were able to find the money to address COVID, bridge that gap. And we're sitting here talking about how we harness the finance to make the transitions in our own societies, and that is really important. But unless we step up and help those who don't have the wherewithal themselves to do it, then we're going to embed that injustice. And that is, I think, one of the outcomes to this COP that we really, over the remaining hours of it, have to do everything we can to avoid.
It's such an important point, also reflecting again on COVID-19 and the links, of course, to the climate crisis in terms of not moving at pace. And Dr. Tedros, the head of the World Health Organization, has called this lack of vaccines going to the global south as vaccine apartheid. And there's something about, I think, doing both what you've just said, which is the need also for global solidarity, but also over time, if we're doing capitalism differently in the ways that you have been talking about, we actually could rely less and less on kind of charity and philanthropy, and would actually have that distributed capacity globally to produce, to innovate. And unfortunately, coming back to this issue of conditionalities, frankly speaking, it has been the problematic conditionalities of the past that haven't allowed.
On climate, I think there's, I'm not picking on you here, I wouldn't dare, but on climate, I think, and on climate finance and climate justice, one of the things we've got to turn on its head is that this is not a case of charity from the developed to the developing world. We created climate change.
Exactly.
The city, birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, we have created climate change, and it's the global south and vulnerable countries that are paying the price of that. This is an obligation we owe.
Exactly.
It's not about charity. I think we've got to really change the mindset on that.
Absolutely. And by calling it justice, it's also about, for the future generations, again, to do capitalism differently, so we don't have to keep doing this over and over. So let's open it up to the floor. And because I'm very aware that we did not have the Minister of the Environment from Egypt, and we are in some ways representing here the global north, I would love it if we can hear some more diverse voices. And I know that we have the ex-Minister of the Environment from Panama, who just raised his hand quickly. So if we can hear also from a part of the world that is surrounded by water. Okay. Yes.
Okay,
First you,
I can't
and
claim
then.
to be from the global south.
Yeah.
But I'm glad to see an all-female panel, however. So the deal part of the European Green Deal and the social contract and this doing capitalism differently, does this change party politics, especially in Europe? Is it just a new form of right versus left on economic policy? Or does it create a fundamentally different kind of cleavage, especially for young people? Will they be judging all parties in the future in terms of who they vote for on how much they've delivered on climate and environment?
Yeah, I think they'll judge us not just in terms of who they vote for. I think they will judge us morally and pretty harshly if we don't get this right. I mean, I can only speak for Scotland here. You know, across the political traditional left-right divide, and there are obviously other political divides in Scotland that I won't go into that span left-right divides, but there's actually quite a lot of consensus around this, not complete consensus, but I think that idea of doing capitalism differently, of all of the things we've been talking about here, there's quite significant buy-in to. But yeah, I don't think we can overstate the degree to which this generation of leaders is really, you know, the decisions we make will decide whether the next generations have a planet able to be inhabited the way it is right now. And therefore that obligation not to fail is enormous, and there'll be judgments, big judgments made of this generation by the next one and the ones after that.
Yes, just a short comment. I think that this is the issue, and there is a great and increasing understanding that these are the core issues that the left parties need, everybody, but the left parties need to address. So this the great shift on where they add value of making politics in a different way, taking into consideration these time dimensions, so intergenerational, but also geographical dimensions, and the way wealth is ensured or predistributed or redistributed is at the core of the discussions. And I think that we will be witnessing and participating in this type of discussions for the discussions for the time to be.
And if I may, one word you used before was purpose, and the way that the corporate sector is talking about it. So I think we need to really go beyond the ideology of left and right, but also the ideology of, you know, is this state or is it business? It's obviously both, but this notion of purpose and stakeholder value, which is increasingly becoming part of the narrative, you know, to replace just maximization of shareholder value, this is the moment to test the kind of walk of that talk. And this is about putting purpose at the center, not just of corporate governance, but of public-private partnerships, precisely through these kind of new social contracts and deal making. So thanks for the question. Yes, please.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Mariana. Hola, Teresa. Gusto
Hola.
verte.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Emilio Sempris, former Minister of Environment of Panama, and now running the Prosperity Fund. So I really enjoyed your comments. The concern that I have is that we're not doing enough to address the silos ideologies. Right now we're talking about climate change, but I don't see much effort into and commitment into assisting developing countries to adopt the Green Deal type of policies, and in a way, as you guys are moving towards a greener transition, we need to develop, and we want to develop with the tools that we have. And those tools are the tools that build the same fragility, socioeconomic fragility that you're addressing. So I would like to see a clearer picture on how we can have a cooperation north-south, so that we reduce our capacity to build the fragility that now you're facing. And also try to see the complete picture, because the less we spend in addressing the main issues in the region, the more migration you're gonna get.
Yeah.
But I don't see the discussion on migration and climate change and health, and see how we can have a systemic discussion on all issues.
Would either of you like to?
Well, I think that there are several issues that are very important here, and I think that things are changing very fast, even if not fast enough. We could not have thought of the IMF talking about special drawing rights, or talking about climate vulnerability, financial vulnerability, and not necessarily well tackled. But we could not have expected the IMF discussing this type of issues as part of their core agenda not so far ago. The development banks thinking in what does development mean when going through these dimensions. And I think that we need to differentiate, as it was stated by Mariana and Nicola. I think that there are solidarity flows and consistent financial flows and investments for development that need to be increasingly and quickly consistent. And here we see that when we open the discussion on what does long-term finance, adaptation finance, what does this mean, we are still lacking lots of understanding on how we can organize this big transformation in terms of financial expectation and financial current responses. And this is not the place to discuss about finance, even if we need to orientate how to discuss about finance, but still, when we see how the finance ministers start to understand that this is the issue, not an issue, the issue, it is very interesting to see the type of responses we are witnessing, how they emerge. No? So not concrete short-term response, but certainly a good reason and a good understanding of the importance to provide the right answers very soon.
Thank you.
I mean, I agree with all of that, and I think you're absolutely right to talk about the need and all too often the failure to see the bigger picture. You know, the population displacements that climate change is going to lead to will lead to migration flows across the world. Many developed countries will feel the disruption, I don't mean that as a pejorative word of that, perhaps long before they will feel the direct impacts or the direct extreme impacts of climate change. Climate change is embedding some of the existing inequalities, gender inequality. You know, the majority of people displaced will be women and children, so at a time when we should be driving forward progress in terms of educating girls around the world, lifting people out of poverty, climate change and what flows from that will deepen those inequalities. So all of this is interconnected, and we need to see it as interconnected. And I agree with everything that has been said there about climate finance. We need to sort out the quantum, but also the flows and the accessibility and the conditionality. And you know, it's not good enough just to make money available that then adds to the existing indebtedness of already heavily indebted countries. So it's all of that needs quickly to be resolved in order that you have the tools to do what needs to be done. So all of this is connected, and I think all of these points are really crucial to what's been discussed here.
Yeah, and thanks for the question, because it keeps coming back to, again, you know, how do we do capitalism differently? Even in the UK, the level of private debt that we have now is back at the level it was just before the financial crisis. So private debt to disposable income, and that's what caused the financial crisis. You'd think it'd be on the front pages of the FT. It's not. And I chair the WHO, the World Health Organization Council on the Economics of Health for All, an all-woman panel. And we've just put out a brief that was meant for G20 precisely on this question, but around health, which is, yes, of course we need more finance to finance, you know, vaccine distribution and so on, but we have to recognize that what got us into this mess in the first place was just thinking that you can just, at times of emergencies, just flood the system with liquidity, put money kind of almost from helicopters. We need to restructure the finance. It was the problematic types of finance that have also rendered our systems very unresilient, unsustainable, and so on. So thank you. Other questions? Yes, please.
Hello. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I'm Ana. I'm from Spain. I mostly do activism with Fridays for Future Valencia, so I hope it's okay for me to take some space representing the youth, I guess.
Great.
Yeah. And I'm also really active in feminism. So thank you for highlighting the fact that the front row was all men at the start and for fixing that. And yeah, so Teresa, you were talking about that it's really like the first step is to criticize, but then we also have to find solutions. And in imagining these solutions, I wanted to ask, what role do you see for feminist perspectives, and in imagining the solutions, and also from the youth perspective, what sort of actions are you taking to include us? Because sometimes we feel a bit ignored. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Excellent question.
Well, I think
Both
it
of you.
is yes.
You can't not answer this question. Great question.
No, I think it is a fair question, and it is. I think it is good to have a common answer on this, because it is true that we need to ensure that there is a room for innovation. So something that it is not a structure, it is not officialized, that we can facilitate this type of responses that can be very different. It is true that the official and institutional frameworks, even for participation of youth, need to be rethought and reconceived so to facilitate and to receive this type of inputs. At the same time, I think that it has an increasing understanding on the importance of having a gender perspective on the climate agenda, and in fact, we will be leaving this room and going to meet other women that find themselves being doers and solvers, and not just being passive citizens or passive ministers. And I think that as we need to combine, and that's what we try, some testing pilot case. I mean, the citizens' assembly or youth assemblies that could be dedicated to make recommendations on how to deal with climate change, or how to re-skill, and how to design the professions, the orientation, the education, the training, are very important. We don't know if this is the best way to respond to something that it is being demanded by a relevant share of the society, but I think that it is worthy to test, and I think it is very important also to be open to whatever ideas may come up. But my final comment, it is very good to have ideas on how to proceed. So I think that being a proactive activist, so that it is not just, I don't like this, which is very fair, and it is very important that the message is loud and clear, but we also have ideas on how to contribute or how things can be done, not because we can expect to give this burden to the youth. Mm-hmm. How we organize the burden, the budget or the financial flows, that's not the question, but how in concrete terms we can think how to solve problems differently in the nearby, or in the fields where the different groups and the stakeholders feel that they have an interest to provide ideas, is very important, and I can assure you is very welcome. It's particularly welcome because sometimes you tend to think your problems with the perspective that your own story, your background shows, and having fresh eyes, taking a look at the issues is important.
Oh, I thoroughly agree with all of that. Look, I think if we don't see climate change as a feminist issue, we won't properly address it. It's certainly a human rights issue. Gender inequality is a human rights issue, and the impact of climate change on women, is absolutely a human rights. So we've got to have a feminist gender perspective on this. And that goes from the very practical through to how and where and by who the decisions are being taken. Too often, even take a city like this, if decisions are being taken about how to change the transport system to decarbonise, transport in a city, those decisions still, by and large, are taken by men, and it's largely women who have to take kids to school in the morning, and so have to negotiate the transport system. And so if the decisions don't reflect the real lives of women, then they're not going to work. So we need to get women's lives and experience much more at the heart of this debate, and then that goes right up to the world leaders photograph in here last week. Said more powerfully than any words can what needs to change fundamentally in terms of global leadership. And so it's so important, I think. And young people, what are we doing? For some reason, the UK government decided not to host the Conference of Youth at this COP, which was the first time that's ever happened.
Because the Italians wanted.
Yeah,
Sorry.
okay, well, whatever, I don't know. Anyway, the Scottish Government stepped in to fund the Conference of Youth that happened here in Glasgow, as well as the Milan.
Yes.
So we've done that practically, and we've got to make sure that the voice of youth is heard, not just listened to, but heard meaningfully. But I totally agree, it's not enough to say we don't like things. That's important, and the voice has to be powerful to push people like us further and faster. and maybe we're sounding old now, but you have to have a political process to make things happen. And that's, I think, the really important part of it.
Yeah. Also, it's been both feminists and environmentalists who for now decades have been arguing that how we measure economic growth is incredibly problematic because we don't actually value care. If you marry your babysitter, GDP goes down. If you pollute, GDP goes up. I'll let you all figure that out while we take the two questions in the back, 1 and 2.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Andres Veske and I'm coming from Estonia, and our organization is Green Tiger. We're trying to develop in Estonia kind of steady state economy, which is basically balanced economy between, let's say, where the interest of environment and economy are balanced. The biggest challenges probably are energy and circular economy, what I foresee. But what is your opinion? What kind of, let's say, not business, but economical model you see? What is the dominant in Europe in the future?
Thanks. Because we only have 4 minutes, I'm going to take 2 questions at a time so that we can address both. In front of you, just there, with the mask coming off. And maybe even a quickie in the front, so we have 3 quick ones. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Can I also just add how amazing it is to see a formidable women panel? So I'm a millennial and also from South Africa. I live in Cape Town, so you'll know about day 0 that we experienced. My generation and the generations after me are most likely to be affected by the climate crisis. And this week we've heard a lot about the young people staying angry, but we've also heard about the gap between the human construct that is political will and the actions needed to ensure our safety on this earth. So my question and perhaps challenge to you as politicians and decision makers is, how can we make you move faster? How many more marches, how many more Gretas?
Yeah.
What do you need from us?
So circular economy, speed, and third here. Very little time, so I'm going to ask you both to address all 3 super
Thank
quick.
you very much for your vision and your inspiring leadership. I feel very proud to be here. I'm from my point of view as a woman, I think it's very, very important to see this panel. But the question of this panel was at the beginning getting serious about the Green Deal. And my question is, do we need a social cohesion pillar for the Green Deal? And this is something else that I would like to ask, because you have mentioned that it's important that we have common answers, but maybe we need as well different answers to those sectors like farmers, transport sectors that require different answers.
Great.
Thank you very much.
And where are you from? Because we had Estonia, South Africa, and
I come from Spain, and from the south of Spain, Andalusia, and I work for the north of Spain. I work for the University of Barcelona.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we have social cohesion, circular economy, and come on, hurry up. So either one of you, begin.
So circular economy, I think, is hugely important, and not just in a practical sense. I think we have to radically rethink our approach to consumption and what matters in life and what we value and our approach to well-being. And actually, I hope the horrible experience of COVID might have prompted us to do some of that a bit more fundamentally than we would otherwise have done. I absolutely agree with your points about social cohesion, but I also agree with what I understood the point part of the point you were making to be is that there's no one size fits all to this. There are different answers and solutions in agriculture than there will be in oil and gas and other parts of the economy. And the just transition approach we are developing here tries to take a very sectoral approach and appreciate that we need to think about the different circumstances and respond accordingly. And your question from South Africa, I think you are already getting leaders to move further and faster. One of the things that's changed, I think, here, and it's not enough, is that everybody wants to be seen to be doing the right thing. Some people are not actually doing the right thing, but so there is a sense of momentum. We've just got to get it to go even further and even faster. I think we are on the right track, but that voice needs to keep pushing us forward, and then it's for us to translate that voice into action. But please don't lose heart or hope around this, because I think we are much further forward than we've ever been before, and we just need to keep that momentum building.
And holding, of course, governments accountable.
Totally.
Right? I mean, we need metrics that after 6 months of inertia, we hit the streets again.
I'm going to respond by the inverse order. So I could say that normal politicians, because there are some politicians that are not very normal.
You're very normal.
do want to earn the future. So they pay much attention to what youth say and express as priorities and concern. I say there are people that want to come back to the past, but the normal thing is that people want to earn the future and to invest into the future. So I agree with Nicola. I think that the energy that the youth movement is introducing into this process is extraordinary, and sometimes it is difficult to understand even for traditional NGOs what does this mean, what they want, how we can use in a positive way, as you are suggesting, this energy, so to channel the responses. And I think that we need to think on how we can make full use of this and how we can fit in the different ecosystems and territories the type of responses that we need. I think that social cohesion is very important, and I think that social cohesion means also talking to people living in rural areas and in small villages. It's not just urban people and that's all. And I think that we need to identify where the sensitiveness may be and the impact of such a deep transformation in such a short term, and what type of concrete and oriented solutions may be available to respond to the question marks that there may be phrased in a different manner in different territories. So it's social cohesion, but going through different lenses. And you come from Andalusia, you live in Barcelona, so that's very understandable. And then yes, I think energy, circular economy, and the soil biodiversity and use of resources that will be draining down. And I think that these are the big transformations, but these are also the big opportunities to build together the main priorities for a continent such as Europe, not only in Europe, but I think that it is interesting to use this in a very instrumental manner. So this is my project. This is what we want to achieve, and if we work together, we can tackle these big challenges in these big issues where everybody feels that there is something to do. And that applies for public institutions, but that also applies for corporates. I think that corporates do understand that the circular economy is a good thing, and it makes sense. So how we can facilitate this thing happening, and we all care about the resources, the physical resources that allow us to build prosperity. And I think that we need to facilitate the landing zone and the understanding on how the different trends and realities connect to each other.
Okay, well, look, gracias a todos. So thank you so much. Just absolutely terrific interventions, and it's a real pity that we didn't have Minister Fouad, but of course she will be running COP27, so we'll have plenty of time to talk to her, and this conversation will of course go on YouTube. And just to say, it's been wonderful to hear both the kind of, hanging our dirty laundry out a bit explicitly, like we can't keep pretending things are going well. They're not. So those, bottlenecks that we talked about at the beginning, but also then not stopping there. It's too easy to complain. That kind of granularity of what's being tried and how to scale up the things that are working, but also be quite forthright on what's not working. But also the overall theme about putting this urgency that you reminded us, and you did too, both of you, at the center of how we actually even understand how the economy works, how value is created, how we can collaborate and kind of really inspire collective intelligence, all issues that are just as important during a health pandemic as it is during the climate crisis and perhaps the next financial crisis, which I just also told you might just happen. No, anyway, just stay positive. We cannot go from crisis to crisis. No. Anyway, thank you everyone for coming. And again, share this video please with your networks. Thank you.